My daughter needs that window seat. Move. A white woman stood in the aisle, her sharp gaze fixed on the young black student occupying the seat. A heavy silence spread around them. A few passengers looked over. Some turned away as if they hadn't seen a thing. No one could have guessed that in a matter of minutes, the entire situation would flip upside down, and the only person who would leave feeling humiliated wouldn't be that young student. The announcement for Flight 2837 from Houston to Denver echoed across the speakers in the busy airport terminal. The voice, crisp and authoritative, alternated between welcoming phrases and reminders for passengers to board in an orderly fashion. 17-year-old Zuri James paused in front of Gate 22, her heart fluttering with a combination of nerves and excitement. This wasn't just any trip. Zuri clutched the handle of her carry-on bag with slightly sweaty palms. The black backpack slung over one shoulder felt heavier than normal, stuffed with textbooks, notebooks filled with scribbled calculations, plus half a dozen highlighter pens she often used for color-coding her notes. The flight would deliver her to Denver, where she would compete in the National Scholastic Achievers Conference NSAC, a competition known for catapulting high school students to the attention of top universities. Walking onto the jet bridge felt surreal. In Zuri's mind, she replayed all the hurdles she'd already overcome. She remembered the hours spent in her bedroom, textbooks splayed around her, the dim desk lamp turning the pages a little yellow at the edges. She recalled how she'd soared through the preliminary exams, how her favorite teacher, Ms. Calloway, had invited her to stay after class for an extra math session, praising her conceptual leaps and encouraging her not to hold back any intellectual curiosity. But this flight felt more significant than a mere 1,000-mile journey. She thought of her mother, Alana James, who worked overtime as a nurse, taking on extra shifts just to help her daughter afford the traveling expenses. She remembered how her mother's eyes welled with tears when Zuri had casually mentioned the possibility of snagging a national scholarship that could open the door to Elmbridge University, her dream school. For months, Zuri had carried that image of her mother's face, equal parts pride and hope, and used it as fuel for her studies. Once on board, Zuri looked for her seat with a determined spark in her eye. The boarding pass in her hand read 12A, a window seat she'd painstakingly chosen. For some reason, she found it easier to study in a window seat, perhaps because she could lean against the wall and not feel so cramped. Also, she didn't want to disturb neighbors if she needed to adjust her posture, flip through a binder, or retrieve items from her backpack. Her feet tapped lightly on the thin airplane carpet as she moved along the aisle. The plane smelled of cabin air, recycled, a bit stale, but somehow carrying a promise of new beginnings. Once at row 12, she slid into 12A and carefully stowed her black backpack underneath the seat. She laid a small math workbook on her lap, intending to review some final notes, a mix of advanced algebra and historical facts, since the NSAC covered an impressive range of subjects. Her seat was no first-class extravagance, just a standard economy row. But to Zuri, it felt like exactly what she needed, a vantage point on the world. The glass of the window gave her a view of the bustling runway, a silver reflection of planes taxiing under the Texan sun. The sky soared out to greet her. She took a moment to trace the silhouette of a plane as it took off, thinking, "Soon I'll be in the clouds, heading toward the biggest test of my academic life." Despite her nerves, she couldn't help a small smile. Life was about to change. She was sure of it. Zuri had just slipped her pen from the spiral-bound notebook when footsteps stopped directly at her row. She looked up to see a middle-aged white woman, probably in her late 40s. Her auburn blonde hair was cut into a sleek style that brushed her shoulders, and her manicured fingernails tapped against the handle of the seat. Beside her stood a young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing a pink hoodie and clutching a stuffed unicorn. The woman's expression was already pinched as she peered down at Zuri, gaze sweeping over the jacket in Zuri's lap and the open workbook. Then came the words that shattered the hush of the settling plane. "My daughter needs that window seat move." At first, the directness of the statement made Zuri wonder if she'd misheard. Usually, one might hear a hello or could we possibly switch seats. In Zuri's experience, seat swaps tended to start with politeness, but the woman's tone was so clipped, so demanding that Zuri automatically felt her defenses rise. "I'm sorry," Zuri said, furrowing her brow, "but this is the seat I booked in advance. I really needed to study for an exam." Her words were factual, spoken quietly. She wasn't trying to be confrontational. However, the woman's eyes narrowed as though Zuri had just uttered a deep insult. "My daughter," the woman repeated, somewhat slower and louder, "needs the window. She gets anxious during flights. Are you refusing to do a simple kindness for a child?" Zuri was suddenly aware that the rows around them were eavesdropping. She heard a few seat belts click as passengers sat straighter, heads pivoting slightly. Another woman in the next row turned to glance, then turned away fast as if she didn't want to get involved. In truth, Zuri had no issue with helping a nervous child. If this had been asked politely, if the child really had issues with flight anxiety, Zuri might have considered switching. But the woman's manner bristled with condescension and accusation, as though Zuri was automatically some villain for not leaping out of her seat. Clearing her throat, Zuri clung to calm. "I understand you want your daughter by the window," she said, "but I specifically reserved 12A for a reason. I'm preparing for a major competition, and it was important I sit here." The little girl shifted awkwardly, glancing between her mother and Zuri. She didn't look especially anxious, just uncomfortable with the scene her mother was making. That was when the woman dropped her voice slightly, but still spoke loudly enough for the row behind them to overhear. "Kids your age often don't appreciate the bigger picture. Maybe your school project can wait. My daughter's fear of flying is immediate and real." Zuri stiffened at the implied superiority in the statement. She was used to microaggressions, people telling her to be grateful for small mercies, or acting as though her concerns and goals were less valid because she was just a kid. She hated that tone. And she especially hated that this woman, who had no idea how crucial the upcoming exam was for Zuri's future, could so casually dismiss it as a school project. "I'm sorry," Zuri repeated, gentle but firm. "I won't be switching seats." A stony silence fell. The mother's nostrils flared. For a moment, Zuri thought she might forcibly reach over to pick up Zuri's bag or physically try to dislodge her. Instead, the woman turned on her heel and flagged down a passing flight attendant with a dramatic wave of her hand. "Excuse me, over here," the woman called, attracting the attention of a flight attendant in a neatly pressed uniform. Her name tag read Marisol. She was a petite woman in her late 20s, brunette hair in a neat chignon, wearing a polite smile that looked like it had seen its share of stressful traveler demands. Marisol stepped closer with a professional nod. "How can I help you, ma'am?" "This girl," the woman began, in a tone somewhere between outraged and self-righteous, "refuses to switch seats with my child, who experiences intense flight anxiety. She needs the window to feel calm. I don't see why a teenager should have priority over a child with actual needs." Zuri cringed at how the woman twisted the narrative. At this point, half the passengers in rows 11 to 13 were keenly interested. A few started whispering to one another. Zuri could see a man in the aisle seat diagonally across from them raising an eyebrow as if to say, "Did that lady really just say it like that?" Marisol, to her credit, did not jump to conclusions. She checked her device, a small tablet listing seat assignments, and then looked at Zuri. "Your name, please." "Zuri James," Zuri answered, handing over her boarding pass for confirmation. Marisol's stylus tapped the screen, verifying. "Yes, Miss James is assigned to 12A, ma'am. Your daughter's seat is." "Let me see here, 15C. That's an aisle seat, correct?" The woman pursed her lips, bristling. "Yes, it is, because all the window seats were gone by the time we booked. But my daughter's comfort is obviously more important than—" She paused, leveling a glare at Zuri's workbook. "Some reading assignment." Zuri opened her mouth, about to reiterate her reasons, but Marisol stepped in, her voice calm yet commanding. "I understand your concern, ma'am, and I'm happy to help you find a passenger willing to exchange seats. However, Miss James has a valid ticket for 12A if she chooses to remain in her seat. That's within her right." The mother blinked, seeming taken aback that the flight attendant hadn't sided with her. Perhaps she was used to always getting her way with minimal pushback. "Are you telling me," she said slowly, as though clarifying with a child, "that my daughter's anxiety means nothing to this airline staff? Is that your official stance?" The cabin seemed to hush further. Zuri's heart thumped. She could sense the mother was trying to paint a narrative, staff ignoring the plight of a suffering child, forcing her to remain in the dreaded aisle seat, overshadowed by someone else's selfishness. Marisol shook her head. "No, ma'am. We absolutely care about every passenger's comfort, but we cannot force another traveler to move if they have a valid reservation. Perhaps we can find you another window seat or place you next to a sympathetic passenger willing to switch. Let me see if any windows are still open." She consulted her tablet. Zuri glanced at the mother's face, seeing the twist of frustration. Zuri felt a pang of sympathy for the little girl, whose cheeks had turned pink with embarrassment. The child kept hugging her plush unicorn, eyes a bit wet, but more from shame at the spectacle than any visible terror of flying. Marisol flipped through her seat map, but with a near-full flight, finding an empty window seat was unlikely. After a moment, she turned back. "It looks like we're completely booked. If you'd like, I can ask around to see if anyone is willing to swap, but that may require some patience." The mother's lips pressed into a tight line. "Fine, but you can be sure I'll be contacting customer service about this." With that, she turned a withering look back to Zuri. "In case you've forgotten, there's a child here." Zuri opened her mouth, but the words stuck. She could only meet the mother's glare with a level gaze, refusing to be intimidated. Then, with a dramatic sigh, the woman led her daughter down the aisle toward row 15. Marisol bent down so only Zuri could hear her. "If anyone around here is happy to switch, I'll come let you know, okay?" She smiled sympathetically. "Try not to let it bother you too much. People can get tense when flying." "Thank you," Zuri whispered, exhaling. Her pulse was still racing. Marisol headed off to continue her checks, and the hum of conversation resumed. Zuri settled back into her seat, but it was hard to concentrate on her workbook. That woman sure was something else. She'd encountered adversity before, subtle and obvious, especially as a black student in mostly white, competitive academic circles. But rarely had it played out so abruptly in front of a plane full of strangers. Jason Carter, the young man sitting next to her in 12B, leaned in, offering a brief, wry smile. "You okay?" Zuri nodded, though her nerves still tingled. "I'll be fine." She let out a shaky exhale. "I just didn't expect to be labeled the heartless teen before the plane even takes off." Jason chuckled softly. "That was intense, but you handled it well. I'm Jason, by the way." "I'm Zuri," she said quietly, forcing a polite smile. She turned to the window, gazing out at the bright runway once more. The plane had yet to push back from the gate. The day was still young. A small knot in her stomach reminded her that she'd come prepared for an academic battle in Denver, but she hadn't planned on a confrontation with an outraged fellow passenger. She thought to herself, if this is a taste of how the rest of this trip is going to go, I better stay strong. The plane finally began taxiing, the engine's low rumble intensifying beneath the floor. Zuri tried to refocus, flipping open her math workbook. She scanned a couple of integrals, made a mental note about partial fractions, but the memory of that woman's furious glare kept popping into her head. Next to her, Jason had opened a sleek laptop. The soft glow of the screen reflected on his face. He typed something quickly, then closed it with a short sigh. "So," he ventured quietly, "you're heading to Denver for something big, I guess. Competition or conference, maybe." Zuri tried to quell her jitters and forced her mind onto the topic she loved, academics. "Yeah, the National Scholastic Achievers Conference. It's a big cross-subject competition, math, science, history, a few other categories." Jason whistled under his breath. "Impressive. I've heard of that. I'm not a teacher or anything, but I do some volunteer work with local schools. The kids in my neighborhood talk about it like it's the Olympiad of high school." "Feels like it," Zuri said, lips curving into a half-smile. "If I do well, I might land a scholarship to Elmbridge University. That's my dream school." "Elmbridge," Jason repeated, nodding. "That's an Ivy-tier place. It's fantastic." Silence settled between them for a moment, but a warm kind of silence, not awkward. The plane jerked slightly, turning onto the runway. Zuri listened to the safety briefing echo from the overhead monitors. Her seat belt was snug, but she adjusted it a bit tighter, somehow wanting the physical reassurance that she was secure. Then the plane's engines roared. Zuri felt the vibration under her feet, the seat rattling as the pilot accelerated. A push against her back signaled takeoff, that adrenaline-pumping moment of rising from the ground. She glanced out the window, seeing the city of Houston sprawl smaller and smaller, until eventually, clouds replaced the cityscape. After a minute or two, the seat belt light blinked off and the flight attendants began their beverage service. Jason turned toward her again, resting one elbow on the armrest. "I'm on my way to Denver for a conference too," he explained. "But it's specifically about educational equity, looking at new policies, community engagement, stuff like that. I'm a grad student over at Westbrook University. Social policy is my focus." Zuri's ears perked up. "That's cool. Education equity is." "Well, it's definitely something that matters to me." Jason laughed lightly. "I got that sense, especially after how you stood your ground. Some folks just assume, younger means less deserving. or they look at you and decide you don't belong or that your priorities are worthless. Zuri nodded, remembering the uninvited woman's attitude and how, in those first seconds, she'd made a snap judgment about Zuri. "It happens," she murmured, "but I've got no intention of letting it stop me." "Good," Jason said, sounding genuinely pleased. "I wish more high school students had that approach. Hard to keep self-confidence when society undervalues you, especially if you're from a minority community. People put you in a box." Zuri bit her lip. She felt that her entire life, tests in classes where teachers double-checked her answers as though suspecting cheating when she outperformed expectations, or the subtle comments from peers about how surprising it was that she excelled at advanced math. They were silent for a moment as the flight attendants rolled their cart past. Jason asked for a ginger ale. Zuri requested water. Her mouth felt parched from the tension. Between sips, Jason asked, "Do you mind me quizzing you on your competition prep? Maybe I can toss you a hypothetical policy question or two so you can sharpen those debate skills." Zuri blinked, momentarily taken aback. "Policy questions," he shrugged. "I read on the NSAC website that the advanced portion for older students sometimes includes short debates or impromptu speeches on real-world topics. I could be your practice partner for the next 2 hours of flight if you want." Zuri smiled in surprise. She hadn't expected to find an ally here. "Sure," she agreed, a trickle of excitement threading through her. "I'm always up for practice." "Great," Jason said. He rummaged in his laptop bag for a moment, producing a battered leather notebook filled with scribbled bullet points. "I was doing some reading about how certain states handle teacher pay structures. Let's say you have to propose a nationwide policy for teacher salaries to narrow the gap in educational quality. How would you do it?" Zuri took a second to think, heartbeat quickening with the rush of mental engagement. "I'd start by establishing a federal baseline for teacher salaries, like a minimum wage but for educators, supplemented by local incentives. That ensures schools in lower-income districts can still offer competitive pay to attract quality teachers. But I'd also address teacher training programs, because pay alone doesn't fix the system if there's not enough professional development." Jason grinned, leaning in. "But how do you ensure funding is distributed fairly among districts? Local property taxes create massive disparities." The conversation rolled on. For the next half hour they volleyed back and forth. Zuri became so engrossed in their mock debate that she nearly forgot about the earlier confrontation. Despite the cramped airplane seat, she felt her mind expand, testing ideas, refining arguments. Halfway through, Jason paused. "You're quick on your feet," he said, "and you're not just rattling off memorized stats. You really think these issues through." Zuri's cheeks warmed. Praise was nice, but she was more excited about the synergy she felt discussing these bigger topics. "Well, I do love reading about social policy, and my teacher, Ms. Calloway, always said that math is just a tool. Real power is applying it to real problems. If you're skilled at logic and analysis, you can tackle almost anything." Jason sipped his ginger ale, looking thoughtful. "You know, if you do get into Elmbridge, they have one of the top public policy undergrad tracks in the country. They push an interdisciplinary approach combining data analysis, history, economics, perfect for someone like you." Zuri nodded, an excited flutter in her chest. "That's exactly why I want to go there. I don't just want to be good at math, I want to use it to, I don't know, change something." He gave a conspiratorial smile. "Keep that spirit, Zuri. It'll take you places." Their conversation was abruptly halted by a sudden turbulence that jostled the plane. Zuri gripped her armrests, a reflex that made her catch a glimpse of row 15. She saw the mother from earlier gripping the seat in front of her, the little girl wide-eyed. Strangely, the child didn't seem that panicked. Maybe the mother was the truly anxious flyer. Zuri swallowed a pang of guilt, but then quickly pushed it aside. She had offered no malice. She had no reason to feel guilty. She just hoped the rest of the flight would be peaceful. After a mostly uneventful 2-hour journey, aside from occasional turbulence and more seat belt sign dings, the plane began its descent into Denver International Airport. Through the window, Zuri caught the first glimpses of the Rocky Mountains. Their snow-capped peaks reflected a golden afternoon sun, a view so striking it temporarily stole her breath. "We're landing soon," Jason noted, putting away his laptop and little notebook. Zuri carefully stored her own materials. She felt a mix of eagerness and apprehension. In less than an hour, she'd collect her luggage, head to the hotel, and the very next morning, she'd be face to face with the starting round of the NSAC. Everything felt as though it were moving at hyperspeed. There was a crackle from the PA system, followed by the pilot's voice welcoming them to Denver, giving local temperature and time. The flight attendants began their landing protocols, instructing passengers to return seat backs to their upright positions. Zuri's heart skipped when she saw the mother, Rebecca Willard, as she'd overheard her name when she was speaking with another passenger, stand and move into the aisle the moment the plane's wheels touched the runway. She had that same expression of irritation, as if the entire flight had been an ordeal inflicted upon her. She was glaring in Zuri's direction, though not quite meeting her eyes. Zuri swiftly looked away, focusing on the seat in front of her. She didn't want any final confrontation. Once the plane taxied to the gate, people began standing, yanking overhead luggage free. Zuri stayed seated to avoid the jostling rush. Jason, half standing, turned and offered a slight grin. "I never asked when's your competition start." "Tomorrow morning. It lasts 3 days for the final rounds. If I place top 3, I'm basically guaranteed a scholarship to Elmbridge," Zuri explained. The thought made her stomach do nervous flips, but also filled her with longing. She needed that scholarship. Jason nodded, looking genuinely happy for her. "That's incredible. I have a good feeling you'll do great. Listen, if you have time, maybe after you're done with the competition, I could introduce you to some folks at the Educational Equity Conference. I'm sure some of them would love hearing from a bright perspective like yours." Zuri felt a small flutter of excitement at the idea of networking with professionals in the field. "Sure," she answered. "That would be awesome." They parted ways in the aisle, exchanging phone numbers. Zuri saw him walk off toward baggage claim. She lingered behind him, rummaging in the overhead bin for her small suitcase. She hoped she'd see him again. It was rare to find someone who understood her passion for bridging math, policy, and social issues. But as she turned, she found herself face to face with the woman from earlier, Rebecca. The overhead lights cast faint circles on the plane's cabin floor, and people were still waiting for the door to open. The child was behind her, silently staring. Rebecca's expression twisted in an odd mixture of frustration and forced politeness. She said nothing at first, just stared at Zuri. The tension made Zuri's shoulders inch upward. Finally, Rebecca's lips parted. "I hope you got your studying done," she said quietly, though there was an icy edge in her tone. Zuri swallowed, not entirely sure how to respond. I did, thank you. Rebecca gave a tight nod, then pivoted away as if dismissing Zuri. The child, eyes wide, merely clutched her unicorn and followed. That was strange, Zuri thought. She exhaled, letting the moment pass. She had an odd feeling that the tension wasn't truly resolved. But for now, there was nothing more to be done. She would soon be off the plane, on her way to the biggest academic challenge of her life. In the terminal, Zuri navigated to the baggage carousel. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Mom, arrived safe. Let me know as soon as you land. Proud of you. Zuri quickly texted back that she was fine, recollecting how her mother had parted from her at the gate in Houston, hugging her so tightly that Zuri felt the tears welling in her mother's eyes. She typed a few more words of reassurance, then snatched her purple suitcase from the spinning belt. Outside, a crisp breeze brushed against her face. Compared to the humidity she'd left behind in Houston, Denver's climate felt bright and clean. She inhaled deeply. Tomorrow, the competition begins. A wave of excitement and nerves roared through her mind. She flagged down a rideshare, heading straight to the modest hotel near the conference center. In the back seat of the car, she peered at the city's skyline, the car radio playing soft jazz. The tension from the flight was quickly replaced by her focus on the real reason she was here. But little did she know, that flight and its confrontation were just the prologue to a far bigger challenge. The Marigold Plaza Hotel wasn't five-star luxury, but it was conveniently located near the Horizon Convention Hall, where the NSAC was taking place. Its brick exterior, accented with green awnings, reminded Zuri of an old photograph she once saw of 1920s architecture. She rolled her suitcase through the lobby doors, greeted by the scent of lemon polish and a vase of fresh flowers on a marble-topped table. The lobby had a few lounge chairs, subdued gold carpeting, and a small reception desk tucked against one wall. A tall man in a burgundy vest stood behind it, tapping at a computer. "Checking in?" he asked with polite efficiency. "Yes, one room under Zuri James," she replied, handing over her ID. He nodded, confirming her reservation. "We have you for 3 nights. The conference ends Saturday night, correct?" Zuri confirmed. The man returned her ID and slid over a plastic keycard in a little cardboard sleeve. "Room 305, he said. "Elevators are just down the hallway. Continental breakfast starts at 6 a.m. Good luck at your event." Zuri managed a small smile. "Thanks." She pocketed the keycard and made her way to the elevators, noticing the faint ring of nerves growing in her chest again. "Don't freak out," she told herself. "You've got everything prepared. One day at a time." Room 305 was simple, 2 double beds, she'd only need one, standard beige walls with a framed print of the Denver skyline. She dropped her suitcase next to the closet and flopped onto the closest bed, sinking into the mattress with a sigh. She closed her eyes, thinking she might take a short nap before dinner, but the hum of her thoughts wouldn't quiet. So she stood up again and paced the narrow walkway between the beds, yanking out her phone to check the competition schedule. NSAC Overview, Day 1. General Knowledge Test, written, multiple choice. This round would cut the pool of 100 participants down to 40. Day 2. Subject-specific evaluations, including short-answer questions in math, science, and history, further narrowing from 40 to 10 finalists. Day 3. The final 10 contestants deliver presentations or debates on a wildcard topic, with 3 ultimate winners crowned that evening. Zuri's stomach lurched. She could almost imagine the tension in that final day, where not only her knowledge but also her ability to think under pressure would be on display. She set her phone down and rubbed her temples. The memory of the confrontation on the plane drifted through her mind. The woman's scathing expression, her insistent demands. Zuri recalled the name she'd overheard, Rebecca Willard. For a second, she wondered about the child, if the girl's anxiety was real or if it was mostly the mother's own projecting. But she tried to let it go. She might never see them again. Yet she couldn't stop a whisper of doubt that told her some people are just so sure they're in charge of everything. She would be dealing with all kinds of personalities at the competition, too. Judges, sponsors, maybe other students who believed they had a claim to the top spots. Zuri reminded herself that this was the real world. Not everyone you meet is supportive or even fair. She needed a routine to calm her mind. So she carefully unpacked her main binder, placing it on the small desk near the window. Then she arranged her textbooks in neat stacks, math, science, history, plus a separate folder for practice essays. She placed her best set of mechanical pencils and gel pens to the side. That done, she grabbed her phone again. A text from Ms. Calloway, her beloved math teacher, glowed on the screen. "Ms. Calloway, hope you arrived safe, Zuri. Keep your head up, you've got this. Remember, it's not just about what you know, but how you think. Proud of you already." Zuri felt her heart light. She typed back a quick thanks and promised to keep her updated. Then she decided a walk might help loosen her nerves. Downstairs, she asked the desk clerk for directions to a nearby diner. He recommended Goldie, just a couple blocks away. Perfect. She stepped outside, noticing how the sun had sunk lower, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. The Colorado air carried a crispness that perked her up. As she strolled the sidewalk, her mind wandered to tomorrow's test. Usually, multiple choice was her strong suit. She had a knack for quickly zeroing in on correct answers, especially in math. History might be trickier since it was easy to confuse names and dates under stress. She told herself that as long as she stayed calm, she'd pass. Goldie's diner glowed in neon lights, the interior lined with black and white checkerboard floors. A waitress directed Zuri to a booth by the window. She ordered a burger and a soda, then settled back, letting the comforting smell of fried onions and coffee fill her senses. Halfway through her meal, her phone chimed. She glanced down to see it was a new text from an unknown number. Unknown. "Hey, it's Jason, just checking in, everything okay at the hotel?" She realized she'd given Jason her number earlier but hadn't yet saved his. Quickly, she typed back, "Zuri, all good, grabbing dinner, nervous about tomorrow's big test, but mostly excited." A few seconds later, another buzz, "Jason, you'll kill it. Let me know if you need any last-minute pep talks." Smiling, Zuri saved his contact info. She felt a spark of gratitude. Having a potential friend who wasn't another high school competitor might be a boon. Someone who understood her ambitions without directly competing. She finished her burger, paid, and strolled back to the hotel under the city's streetlights. Denver wasn't as busy as Houston at this hour, but she enjoyed the vibe of the modern downtown looming in the distance, the quiet hush of a new place. Up in her room, Zuri showered and then reviewed her notes in bed, reading until her eyelids drooped. Finally, she let the book slip from her grasp and turned off the lamp. Before drifting off, she whispered a few words to herself. "Tomorrow, is it? Let's do this." Zuri rose at dawn. Her phone alarm hummed with a gentle tune, a choice she'd made to avoid the jarring beep that might spike her anxiety on such an important morning. Despite the early hour, she felt surprisingly alert. She went through her usual ritual, 10 minutes of light stretching and breathing exercises. Ms. Calloway had once recommended it to help her center her thoughts. Then Zuri pulled on a comfortable pair of jeans, a sweater, and practical sneakers. This wasn't a fashion show. She needed to be at ease to concentrate fully. By 7:00 a.m., she was headed downstairs for the hotel's continental breakfast. A small buffet of muffins, cereal, and scrambled eggs was laid out by the coffee machine. Zuri picked up a banana and poured herself orange juice. Her stomach churned with that excited, nervous energy, so she limited herself to nibbling half a muffin. Leaving the hotel, she walked 2 blocks to Horizon Convention Hall, a towering building of glass and steel that reflected the early morning light. Large banners outside read, "National Scholastic Achievers, Conference, Welcome Finalists." Entering through the spinning doors, she heard the hum of a crowd, students, parents, and teachers all hustling about. The air smelled of coffee and fresh paper. A sign directed finalists to a registration desk, where a stern-looking official handed her an ID badge with her name and photo. "Please keep this visible at all times," he said briskly. "Your test location is room B17. Starts promptly at 8:30. Late arrivals not admitted." Zuri pinned the badge to her sweater, nodding in acknowledgement. She found a corridor lined with chairs and tables for pre-test reviews. A sea of students, some conversing in hushed, nervous voices, others flipping through last-minute notes, lay before her. She located a quiet corner seat and pulled out her own binder, scanning a few pages of historical timelines. Occasionally, Zuri would overhear bits of conversation. "I studied for 6 months straight, no breaks. I hope it pays off. If I don't place top 5, my parents will kill me. Heard Elmbridge Scouts are here in person." The mention of Elmbridge made Zuri's ears perk up. Scouts in person. She already knew that top universities sometimes sent representatives to watch these competitions, but hearing it confirmed gave her an extra jolt of adrenaline. At 8:20, a short announcement crackled over the loudspeakers. "All participants in the general knowledge test proceed to your assigned rooms. The test will begin in 10 minutes. Zuri slipped her notes away, inhaled deeply, and headed for room B17. The room itself looked like a large university-style lecture hall, with rows of desks curving upward like seats in a small stadium. She found desk number 23, her assigned seat. A crisp, sealed test packet lay face down at each desk, accompanied by a standard answer sheet. She settled in, placing 2 sharpened pencils and an eraser at the ready. A hush fell as more students trickled in. At exactly 8:30, a proctor stepped to the front of the room. "Good morning," she said firmly. "Welcome to day 1 of the NSAC. This is the general knowledge test. You'll have 90 minutes to complete it. No talking, no electronic devices. If you finish early, remain seated until time is called." Zuri felt sweat gathering on her palms. She wiped them on her jeans, took one more deep breath, and then the proctor said, "You may begin." The room erupted in the quiet rustle of test booklets. Zuri flipped hers open and scanned the first question. It was a straightforward math problem, something about factoring polynomials. She quickly worked it out, circled the answer on the sheet. The next question jumped to American history, referencing the Articles of Confederation. "This is all over the place," she thought, but that was expected for a general knowledge round. Time slipped by in a blur of focused concentration. Zuri dove from geometry to biology, from world history to grammar corrections. She employed a system. Read each question carefully, eliminate obviously wrong choices, trust her gut if she recognized the correct fact or method. Every so often, doubt would creep in. Wait, is it 1781 or 1783 for that treaty? But she forced herself to remain calm. She suspected that overthinking was a bigger threat than not knowing. Finally, the proctor announced, 10 minutes left. Zuri flipped back to check any unanswered questions. There were only two that had truly stumped her. She guessed logically on both, making an educated choice. Her method wasn't foolproof, but it was better than leaving them blank. When the time was called, she put down her pencil, heart thrumming. The proctor collected the papers, and the students began filing out. Zuri exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. In the corridor, an undercurrent of tension still prevailed. Some people looked optimistic, talking about how the test was easier than expected, while others stared at the floor, worried they'd missed something crucial. Zuri wasn't sure how to feel. She thought she did fairly well, but with 100 bright competitors, the cutoff for the next round would likely be high. She decided to call her mother for a quick pick-me-up. Ducking into a side hallway, she dialed the number. Her mother answered immediately, voice bright and encouraging. "How'd it go?" Alana James asked. "I think I did okay," Zuri said, "but I won't know until the results come out this afternoon." Her mother's voice was full of pride. "No matter what, I'm so proud, honey. Just stay calm. You've prepared so hard." Zuri felt her eyes burn slightly with tears. "Thanks, Mom. I'll keep you posted." They hung up, and Zuri looked at the time. She had about 3 hours before the results would be posted on a giant scoreboard in the main lobby. Enough time for lunch and a bit of exploring. She wandered into the spacious main lobby, scanning the scene. Dozens of tables displayed educational materials, new technology for learning, even some college booths. Students and teachers milled about. A large digital scoreboard at the far end was dark, presumably waiting to show the names of the top 40. A swirl of curiosity led her to a row of sponsor tables. She recognized some names, big corporations that funded youth programs. She also noticed smaller nonprofits. She passed by a banner reading Hooper Education Fund and paused, intrigued. "Are you interested in scholarships, dear?" asked a cheerful older woman behind the table. She wore glasses perched low on her nose. "Yes, always," Zuri admitted, stepping closer. The woman introduced herself as Mrs. Delgado, an administrator. She explained that Hooper offered private grants to exceptional students from underrepresented communities. She jotted down Zuri's name. "If you make it to the finals, we'll definitely be watching. Even if you don't end up at Elmbridge, we have partnerships with other universities." Zuri thanked her, pocketing a brochure. The idea that multiple opportunities might open up from this event felt thrilling and a bit overwhelming. Looking around, Zuri spied a corner cafe area with small round tables. She ordered a sandwich, found a quiet spot, and reflected on her test answers. She told herself not to overanalyze. If she made it, she'd push forward. If she didn't, well, she didn't want to think about that. As she rose to toss her trash, her phone buzzed, a text from Jason. "Jason, hey, just arrived at my own conference center. How'd your test go?" "Zuri, it went okay, I think. Results come out at 2 p.m. Jason, you got this." Encouraged, she decided to walk around, let her nerves settle. She meandered into an art display in a side hallway, bright abstract paintings apparently done by local youth. A sign mentioned it was part of a charity fundraiser. She was mulling over a vivid swirl of color when she heard a voice behind her. "I see you made it to the big leagues after all." Zuri turned. Her heart gave a startled lurch. It was Rebecca Willard, the very woman from the plane, only now wearing a professional blazer and holding a conference badge that read, REBCCAWLLARD Judge. Zuri's pulse hammered. "Judge. She's a judge here." Rebecca gave a slow, satisfied smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, hello again, Miss James, or do you prefer Zuri?" Zuri's throat felt dry. "Zuri is fine," she managed, her voice low. Rebecca nodded, stepping closer in her black heels. She had a file folder in hand, though Zuri couldn't read the label. "What an unexpected coincidence," she said, tone dripping with something that wasn't quite friendliness. Zuri forced a polite expression. "I guess so." "You're one of the competition judges." Rebecca's lips twitched. "I am, and I take this event very seriously. I hope you'll be cooperative for your own sake." Zuri's mind whirled. This woman was the same person who tried to force her out of her seat on the plane, who had treated her with contempt when Zuri refused. Now she held direct influence over the competition. That was more than bad luck. Trying to maintain composure, Zuri nodded stiffly. "I respect the competition, too. And I appreciate every judge's hard work." Rebecca studied her with an unreadable expression. "Well, good luck, Miss James. I'll be watching your performance with keen interest." Then she pivoted and walked off, leaving Zuri standing there, heart racing. In that instant, Zuri realized that the tension from the plane had just evolved into a much bigger threat. The minutes crawled by. Zuri hovered near the digital scoreboard in the lobby with throngs of other contestants, each looking equally anxious. At exactly 2 p.m., a staff member in a navy blue blazer stepped up to a microphone. "We will now display the top 40 scorers who advance to tomorrow's round," she announced. The scoreboard behind her flickered. Names began populating in columns. Zuri's stomach twisted. She scanned the first few lines, a swirl of last names and first initials. Then she saw it, James Zuri, rank 7. She let out a gasp of relief. She made it, and not by the skin of her teeth. She was fairly high on the list. Around her, some students erupted in cheers, hugging each other, while others stared in dismay at the board, failing to find their names. The reality of a cutthroat competition sank in. Zuri's heart hammered with excitement. 7th place, that was a great start. Her phone vibrated. She spotted a message from Ms. Calloway congratulating her. The teacher must have seen the live update online. Another text from her mother: "I knew you could do it." Yet amid her surge of joy, a chill prickled at the back of her mind. She caught a glimpse of a judge's table off to the side, where a few officials stood observing. One of them was Rebecca, arms folded, eyes scanning the board, face expressionless. But the moment she noticed Zuri looking, her mouth curved into something that could have been a polite smile or a mocking smirk. Zuri turned away. She refused to let that woman cast a shadow on her success. The next few hours were given to orientation for the 40 qualifiers. Zuri and the others filed into a smaller auditorium where they received instructions for day 2, an intense, subject-specific test in math, science, and history. This round would whittle them from 40 down to 10 finalists. "This is your chance to demonstrate deeper knowledge," explained an official, "not just broad general skills. Each subject is tested with 20 advanced questions, both multiple choice and short answer." Zuri felt a tightness in her chest. She was confident in math. She'd never scored below the 95th percentile in any competition. Science was also a strength, though certain areas of biology occasionally tripped her up. History, however, was her Achilles heel if the questions delved into obscure details or required large leaps in connecting timelines. As she listened to the official talk, Zuri took careful notes in her binder. She needed to strategize how to study that evening. A voice in the back of her head whispered about Rebecca. Would that judge specifically watch Zuri's performance with a negative bias? Could she manipulate the process? But the academic portion of the competition was mostly standardized. The bigger threat would come on day 3, where subjective judging could tilt the results. One step at a time, Zuri reminded herself. When the orientation ended, students were ushered back into the main hall. A few parted ways to meet with parents or find study partners. Zuri felt a gentle tug on her elbow. She turned to see a petite woman with a friendly face and bright eyes. "Hi there, Zuri James," the woman asked. "Yes. Congratulations on making the top 40. My name's Dr. Helena Watson, and I'm one of the academic advisors for the conference. I specialize in connecting promising students with mentors and possible scholarships. I saw your name on the results board. I wondered if you'd like to join a small meet and greet tonight with some of the judges and sponsors." Zuri blinked, taken off guard. A meet and greet with the judges. She instantly thought of Rebecca. Dr. Watson nodded. "It'll be a casual networking opportunity, no official competition points or anything. But you get to speak with a few major sponsors, maybe pick their brains. It can be a big help for scholarship support later." Zuri's initial hesitation warred with her sense of ambition. She knew that forging connections could be invaluable. "Where and when?" she asked carefully. "Room C9 here in the convention center, 7 p.m. Dress is business casual, just be yourself." Dr. Watson gave a warm grin. "I look forward to seeing you there." She slipped Zuri a small informational card and disappeared into the swirl of people. Zuri stood there, the card in her hand. A networking event could open doors, but it also likely meant running into her. Still, staying away might be an even bigger missed opportunity. Once back at her hotel, Zuri tossed her backpack on the bed and collapsed beside it. Her day had been a roller coaster. She rummaged in her phone for messages. Sure enough, Jason had texted. "Jason, so you advanced, right? How's it feel?" Zuri typed back, "I'm in the top 40, so relieved but also kinda terrified for tomorrow." Less than a minute later, her phone chimed. "Jason, terrified means you care. You got this. Also, any interesting events tonight? Some conferences do mixers." Zuri, "Actually, yes. A meet and greet at 7 p.m., some judges, sponsors, etc." Jason, that might be big. And that plain lady you told me about, Rebecca, will probably be there, huh?" Zuri felt a wave of nerves reading his words. She typed, "Probably, but I can't skip. If I avoid it, I might lose out. I'm just worried." Jason, "Don't be. Show her you're not intimidated. Be professional, but don't let her push you around. Also, I can swing by the area if you want moral support after it's over. No pressure." She bit her lip, gratitude blossoming. Having a friend nearby, even if just for a few minutes after, might settle her nerves. She typed a quick acceptance. Then she prepared for a short break before hitting the books again. With a fresh shower and a careful selection of clothing, a simple gray blouse and black slacks, Zuri left for the 7 p.m. event with her binder tucked away in her bag. just in case she had any downtime to study. The convention center's corridors were quieter now, though still abuzz with pockets of conversation. Room C9 was set up with round cocktail tables draped in white cloth, a small buffet of hors d'oeuvres, and a bar serving non-alcoholic drinks, sodas and mocktails mostly. About 15 or so people mingled, half of them older professionals in suits or dresses, the other half presumably the student invitees. Zuri paused in the doorway, scanning for any sign of Rebecca. She spotted Dr. Watson in lively conversation with a tall man near the buffet. She also noticed a few teenage faces, one or two from her general knowledge group. Carefully, she stepped inside, trying to exude confidence. She recognized a sponsor from the Hooper Education Fund, Mrs. Delgado from earlier, now wearing a fancy blouse and greeting students. She waved at Zuri, who waved back. Before she could take more than a few steps, a man in a gray suit approached. He introduced himself as Malcolm Pierce, a donor to the competition. "Glad you could make it," he said, shaking her hand warmly. "I hear you placed 7th this morning. Very impressive." "Thank you, sir," Zuri replied, surprised that he knew her rank. He asked about her interests, where she wanted to go to college, what she planned to study. Zuri explained her dream of Elmbridge University, her love of mathematics, and her desire to apply it to social policy. Malcolm seemed genuinely intrigued, nodding thoughtfully. "That's refreshing," he said. "So many gifted math students focus purely on theoretical aspects. Hearing you want to direct it toward real-world problems is fantastic. Keep it up." The conversation buoyed Zuri's spirits. She grabbed a small plate of fruit slices and a soda, carefully navigating the room. She recognized a couple of other judges across the way. None of them looked like Rebecca, though. She was beginning to wonder if maybe Rebecca wouldn't show up at all. That would be a relief. But just as she started to exhale that thought, she glimpsed a flash of auburn blonde hair near the entrance. Rebecca Willard stepped in, wearing a tailored navy blue blazer, her posture impeccably straight. Her gaze swept the room, quickly landing on Zuri. Zuri's stomach clenched. She forced herself to keep a neutral expression, picking up her soda to busy her hands. Rebecca moved to greet Dr. Watson, who introduced her to a couple of sponsors. The older men nodded politely, though Zuri wondered if they sensed the slight chill emanating from her. From across the room, Zuri watched as Rebecca turned in her direction, scanning. For a minute, Zuri considered hiding behind a cluster of sponsors or ducking into the corridor. But that would be running away, and she was done running. Instead, she took a deliberate step forward as though proving to herself that she could stand her ground. Eventually, Rebecca finished her chatter and strolled over to Zuri. "Good evening," she said in that polished tone. "Enjoying yourself?" Zuri nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "The sponsors are friendly and the hors d'oeuvres are great," she replied, forcing a polite smile. "I appreciate the chance to network." Rebecca sipped from a tall glass of sparkling water, eyes never leaving Zuri's face. "You appear quite confident, though confidence alone doesn't win these contests." Zuri felt her hackles rise, but she maintained composure. "Of course, I know I have to earn my place through performance." Rebecca's lips curled. "Performance, yes. Well, the next 2 rounds will really test your depth. Many excel at multiple choice only to crumble under higher scrutiny." Zuri recognized the subtle jab. "She's trying to intimidate me." "I'm prepared," she said neutrally. Silence stretched between them. Rebecca's gaze flicked to the side, noticing Dr. Watson was watching. She quickly rearranged her expression into a mild smile and stepped back. "Well then," she murmured, "best of luck, Zuri." She turned away, leaving Zuri's stomach churning. The tension was palpable, but at least it hadn't escalated into a public confrontation.